That is crazy. Most people get their basement flooring completely wrong, and they find out the hard way. I'm going to show you how to install a warm, dry, mold-free floor that'll last you a lifetime, right here in my own basement. Follow along and see how a few products become a pro-level assembly that creates a 50-year floor you'll never have to think about again. All of the products used in today's video will be linked and available for purchase at Lowe's.com. All right, so to get started on a vinyl flooring installation, it's just a few tools that you need to know about. You need a SPE-square so that you can measure and mark. You gotta have a measuring tape, something to mark your flooring with. Pencil is fine. You're gonna need a knife, and you're going to need the special Z-bar. That's going to make it possible to get a nice fit for the last row. Let's jump into it. Step number one is you've got to have flat floors. Installing floor leveler isn't an option, it's a necessity. It is the reason that most floors installed in a basement fail. Remember, when we're installing vinyl plank, it's a tongue and groove and it locks together. It cannot stretch and grow to follow the waviness of your floor. And if you're looking for a full tutorial on how to do an entire basement, we have the video for that. So once we're flat, the biggest issue we're dealing with is moisture. It's wicking up through your old basement floor constantly. So protection starts with having an underlayment that is a vapor barrier. And I'm using DMX One Step 2.0. So aside from moisture coming up through the floor, there's all kinds of ways to get water in a basement. The DMX acts like a hybrid subfloor. The water will go in and go under, so the underside can be completely soaking wet, and we don't care because we're on the dry side, all right? It creates channels that air can pass in every direction, and those air channels are consistent throughout the whole basement. Even when we connect our joints, the seam is an airspace, and it connects to the next piece of DMX, which is seam is an airspace. We want an airspace because that is the gold. So now you understand the why, let me show you the how. Easiest way to do this is with someone's help, and go to the other end of the room, lay that down. I'm gonna just pull this over to my corner. It shouldn't go under the drywall. You can take your pencil mat and mark your side of the door jamb. Now you can cut it to the right length. The purpose of the membrane is to hold the floor off the floor, right? And it's okay if it doesn't make it all the way to the wall. The way that this operates is the air that flows underneath here, you want it to escape. Because we're adding baseboards, we're okay to have gaps. When you come down to doorways, you want to take out your knife, trim back, and make it easy on yourself. Push all the way through and cut your concrete. You're gonna go through the blades a little quicker that way to push down, make contact with the floor. Know where you're going with it. Okay, don't cut towards yourself, and you can avoid having a trip to the hospital. So obviously we need to add the dimpled mat right up to the transition of the door here. And I'll make sure I have a nice straight edge right off the factory. It's gonna be more than long enough. There we are. And just like tuck tape, always fold over the edge so you can find it later. Good practice here. Pull the tape off and look at the middle of the roll and set the roll on the joint and then push towards it. That'll help keep you nice and straight. And because this is a dimpled crack, it's actually quite comfortable to crawl around on. Now we're gonna just finish cutting in, cutting to the floor, not towards my knees. There we go. We want to get it in as relatively close as we can, so we can actually set it up and crease it, and then you can see the crease, so then you know where to cut. And the crease also helps to guide the knife. Get a handy strip like that, save it for a door threshold. All right, and again guys, make sure you sweep as you go. Just wanted to point out that this wall on the bedroom is far more interior of the space than that wall is. So that's why we stopped it, and then we're going to reinstall starting from this wall coming out. We're gonna show you how to bring it together and splice it together. Find my crease now, cut through it, and we're gonna come healthy into the next room. Now, all I have to do is cut around my door jamb. This is gonna be very much like carpet. I have an overlap of about 4 inches. So I'm gonna go right to the middle of the door. Start with a new blade. I'm gonna cut through both pieces at once. And cutting straight here is not as important as cutting it in one pass, okay? Now we have a perfect seam. Even if it's the shape of waves crashing up at the beach, it doesn't matter because they're exactly the same contour. You're creating our own little puzzle piece here. And that's as far as we're gonna go today with the DMX, because we have a huge pile of vinyl flooring over here climatizing, because when you bring it in, you want to minimize as much work as possible. So think about your process, where you're starting, where you're finishing. Let your product climatize where you're finishing but try to have it where it's within reach so it's easy to get at. Try to avoid having to move it over and over and over again. That's just a lot of extra labor for no result, okay? You want to be organized when you're doing a project like this. We've got our place nice and clean, and the motto is this: when you're on the blue, you stay on the blue, all right? If you walk off of the blue, you're walking off into a dirty area, then you've got to manage, am I making the area dirty again? We're gonna have a broom around. We're constantly taking care of our site to make sure it's clean so we don't get crunching noises down the road. We've got our flooring laid out. It's laid out in such a way that when I open the box, I've got my big fat tongue here facing the direction that I'm installing, all right? So I can grab every one of these. I don't have to pick it up and swing it around. That way you're not gonna hit the ceiling or slice someone's jugular open by accident as they're walking by. Next, we're gonna discuss our approach, because generally speaking, is you start on the longest wall and you work your way into the room. And that is really good advice if you're doing one room. But because we're using a vinyl plank and technology has gotten us to a place where we're not doing one room anymore, we can run the entire square footage of this whole basement without any transitions. There's no seams. We've got a door, we've got a door, we've got a doorway, we have another door. And if we install all of our flooring based off an exterior wall and worked our way into the room, we don't really know. And you can measure this out, but we don't know exactly where it lands, what the slivers are going to be like, what are the optics there, what's the performance of that sliver. Plus, if I have a board that finishes an inch or so shy of that transition into the bathroom, okay, then this little piece here, this sliver, that's going to be where it breaks, because that's where people are walking, okay? And that's what you have to consider. You always want to have a full piece, or as close to full as possible, leading up into a transition like this. If you have a joint in that first 3 inches, that's the joint that's going to break. All right, so step number one is we're going to do a dry fit, okay? We're going to take our flooring and we're going to join it up from one end of the building to the other, and I've got to maintain a 1/4 inch spacing. So, carpenter pencil, 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch. All you need to know, right? It's a lifesaver. Now, I'm going to pull the space off, shove my pencil in there. That's the gap I need for expansion and contraction. We're going to go all the way down, and we're going to take a look at what happens at the other end, because we don't want to have a sliver at the other end as well. So these are 60 inch, which means when I'm working, I want to make sure that I'm staggering my joints. They're always going to be at bare minimum as long as the board is wide. We want to make sure that we're at least 9 inches. I don't want to ever go less, because it just looks stupid. That's all the explanation you need. And the unilock design is stronger when it has more body. So if we were to end up and we came across with our flooring and we're 4, 5, 6, 7, or 8 inches from the wall, what I would do is I would start my row by taking a couple inches off the board so I could move the row back to end up with something that's at least 9, okay? In this case, this is a 1/2 board basically. So this is a great measurement. If I go and I start my next row with a 2/3 cut, it's 20 inches because it's off 60, right? Okay, you see that? My second row would come here. That's a nice Hing there. I still am not more than 60. That's great. So now I got 2 rows that I can guarantee I'm not going to end up with a silly little sliver. Now we got a plan for the first 2 rows. Let's go talk about how we're going to deal with the doorways. So the first thing I want you to do is take a board and we're going to score and snap, and we're going to set this up so we can have something that fits inside the door jamb. All right? This is going to be necessary for us to be able to establish our depth. Now in this particular case, because we have tile and we have a nice trim here, we don't need to go with an overlay when we finish, and they're pretty close as far as the height. It's only a 1/4 inch difference. And so what we're going to do to solve the problem here is I'm going to have my son run this through the table saw and get rid of this little bit of tongue that's sticking out so that this board is flush with the finished picture. In theory, that's where our first joint is going to go. I would love to be able to say, hey, when this door is closed, I really only see one kind of flooring. That's the goal. The door in the other room is exactly the same kind and the same swing, and it'll be in the same location, okay? And that is 3 1/4 inches from finished drywall, all right? So now we come down over here, And we can set this board up 3 1/4 inches from finished drywall. And that side and this side. Beautiful. And so that gives you an idea about where this is going to finish. In a perfect world, I want to be able to finish this whole first run with all the cuts, get this all established, knowing that I'm not going to have a sliver, because this is the most prominent sight line. There will be no furniture along this wall. So if we're going to have any issues, I want to make sure that I deal with them here and make sure I'm not going to run into them. Now, we're not using a laser level yet, but what we are doing is we're visually identifying our expectation for what it looks like finished, okay? So this is a nice depth of finished flooring, and it goes all the way through the door. This is great. I'm loving this. But now we got to see what happens over here, and do we need to make any changes as far as the depth of our door. Okay. So now you can see, once the flooring is installed, I have a almost 6-inch gap over here to the wall. At this current moment, I have a 5-inch plank finishing underneath the door. That's great. That doesn't bother me at all. But what does bother me is I still have this sliver. And that's going to be the weak spot in this build right now. And there's a more likely that this might pop off and cause a gap over time than anything else. So I have options. What if I was to move that board and start it here? And so then the rest of this can all slide over. Okay, then I could have a 4-inch piece of flooring over here instead of a 2. And that would work great, but it affects the whole line. So now I've got to take that possibility to my other door and see what happens there. Over on this end, I have 1 1/4 inches before I get to the outside edge of this drywall. And this flooring is extending into the rest of the room. If I go any more than 1 1/4 inches, okay, I run into a problem where now this plank has to be cut with an H on both sides. And I have to slide that in and install that first. And that's going to be almost next to impossible, the way that we're doing our floor. So then the only other option would be to have one board finish here and put in 2 different pieces, but then I'm going to have a joint right where people are walking. And then this becomes the most likely place of failure. So we have a restriction. I don't want this board going any more than this. That's the maximum that I'm willing to go. That gives me a little over 1 inch. So if that doorway allows me to slide over 1 inch more, that gives me a 3-inch board over here. In a perfect world, I'd like it a little bit bigger, but this is the least concern that I have in the entire room. So to get our depth right, we're simply going to lock this in, and then we're going to stick this right there. I'm going to be a little picky. I'm going to throw a laser line on this, and we're going to make sure this is perfectly straight, because all of these cuts that we're going to make for the flooring, we can just trace them and scribe them in. It'll be super fast right where this lays, as long as we have it in a straight line. So I'm actually right on the money here. That's really good. Now, we are trying to get these in straight line as much as we can. Remember, we're doing this for the purpose of scribing our cuts, making sure that my laser line's on the edge of that flooring. Okay.
Got it.
Now we're taking this little offcut that came from the bathroom door. It's small, and it has a tongue. The tongue is exactly a 1/4 inch wide, okay? Which is the manufacturer recommendation for a gap against the wall. So by just sticking your board here, you can now have the perfect way to scribe the entire run. We're going to put the marker, and I just go all the way down. That's board number 1. This is board number 2. You can see the system here. It's pretty simple. This ends up being the piece that will be cut and goes into that door area. All right, so we're going to stop the scribe right here, cut the board there. Now, that ends up well interior of the frame. Do the same thing over here. Now, in this case, it's a little different because we've installed this door first. We're going to cut this based on the casing so that we can slide underneath the finished casing. So we're going to cut it back here. Take that board up to this point. And then over here. All right. A gap for this drywall. We have a gap for this side as well. I'm going to transfer that line. All right, and then that'll set my depth. We put this up against this wall. We've got to set this depth, okay? And this depth. That marks the size of the door. We're going to finish this off now. All right, this is all getting cut out. And that's it. We're completely scribed all the way down. The only thing that we have left is the depth here still needs to be established. Because remember, we're going to offset about 1 inch and push the whole board this way. I'm going to mark where the metal is on that board there, where the metal is here. Stick it over top. There's my mark there. There's my mark there. Now we're going to get this cut. We haven't even installed a single piece of flooring yet, but at this point right now, you're pretty much done the hardest part, and now it's all smooth sailing from here. So generally speaking, LVP is kind of score and snap, all right? And that just really is easily accomplished with the speed square and a good sharp knife. We turn it over, and then we grab the end of the plank, put your weight on one end, and then you lift, and it snaps. Now this is a really thick product, and it takes a fair amount of effort, okay? So doing score and snap on the long cuts isn't gonna happen. You're gonna wanna have a jigsaw, or I would recommend having a table saw and a jigsaw just for safety and keeping the cuts clean and straight. I think the score and snap is something everybody can do on the short side, but the long side, definitely with this product, forget about it. It's just too robust. So while Matt's out there doing all the cuts, we're going to just talk about the next step here, and that is to set up your first 4 rows. And I'll go with a full board, a half board, a 1/3, and then a 2/3 board. And in my experience, what that ends up with is 4 perfect starting sizes that don't have the Hing effect. And the Hing effect would be like this, where you have joints lined up, they're close together, or they're within 1 inch or 2 of the 3rd row. You don't want to have that. So by starting with these 4 pieces, you'll see that every distance is at least 9 inches. And you can mix and match what your process is going to be, okay? And so then you can kind of work around how random you want your floor to look. Because the last thing you want to do is set it up where it looks like it's being stepped in, all right? Remember, the key to having a really good looking floor is the longer the board, the more options you have, okay? The shorter the pieces, the more stepping you're gonna get. And that holds true for any kind of flooring. So look for something that's as long as you can get, the quality that you want. Start with these 4 rows, and then we'll take the offcuts, bring them back down here, and we'll have that same relationship, even if it's different sizes. And you'll be able to be very successful in not having ugly joints lined up against each other by accident during your program. Okay, so now we have a full-length board cut to our finished edge. We're gonna connect that with 2 planks wide all the way down to create some rigidity, all right? This is everything that comes in this kit. This is the money. Has little pads on the back so you don't damage the surface of your boards. You can actually install that and pull them nice and tight. And here's the tapping block. Now, the idea here is that no matter what flooring you're using, this tapping block will sit on an edge, and then you can hit the block to move it into place. I don't like this because I only have one surface here that does all the work, and it's right on my finished part, right? Like I'm making contact with my finished board. So what I like to do instead is I sacrifice a little bit of the lumber here, and I take an end piece that has the opposite groove. And so then I can use this as my tapping block. Every part of that profile, that uni-click lock, is making contact with my block. So when I'm striking my surface, I'm putting energy into the face, inside the groove, and the tongue all at the same time. So I'm not risking any damage to the actual profile because I got 100% perfect contact. When you put it in the uni-click, you see how it sits off the floor? It's because it's not totally engaged yet. Once you line that up and give it a love tap, then it sits on the floor. Now you know it's engaged. So if you think your floor is good, check. If it's sitting off the floor, it needs to be engaged with the block, all right? There's 2 ways to install flooring. One is you can put it in the long groove, okay? And then you have to use a block and drive it this way. The problem is there's so much material making contact, you're more than likely gonna damage the end boards. If you've ever seen a floor over a long space and all those joints are kind of peaked up, that's what's going on there. The other option is you put the end in first, and then you come along over here and you can kind of work it together, and then you have to drive this end in to get the lock. Now, when you start out, every time you engage something, you're gonna disengage something. And this is the maddening science about this. So, be gentle. This is the process of squaring off all the flooring. Generally speaking, by the time you get to the third row of material, you've actually locked it up nice and square. Using your body weight. There we go. There we go. That's all engaged. Now the other option, you can build the whole plank together and then set it all in at the same time. That speeds it up a lot. Generally, you need a second person to give you a hand. We're just gonna lift it in. Very careful to try to get that as close as we can. Nice, beautiful. And we'll put it in this corner here. Now, here's a great teaching moment. See the debris here? If I tried to put that in the next board, this little bit of debris would cause that joint to fail. It's really hard. It's made of the core. Okay? Throw that in the corner where your garbage pile is. You have to not just install, you have to inspect as you go. When you're inspecting your boards, look for debris in the corners. It's a manufacturing defect. It's all over the place. Check the little tongues on the other side. If there's damage, then break them off. A missing piece of material here is not going to cause that to fail. But if it got damaged during shipping and you don't find it and it breaks off and it gets stuck in the joint, that'll cause it to fail. So inspect your boards as you go. The process is relatively fast already. We're not in a race. Now, all the way down into the bedroom. It's important to have material in every space you're working so you're not running back and forth. If you're having issues with separation, you can put the block right on the joint, Matt.
Yep.
And I can hit here, transferring energy into both pieces. Now we have to measure and cut for the end.
With the tongue on the same side here, if I do make a cut, I won't have a factory edge to butt into this piece and lay it down to finish flush to the wall. So what I have to do is I have to flip the board around and then we measure it and cut it here so that when we do cut it, we can flip it, put it into the joint, and then slam it down. Instead of marking it fresh off this edge of this piece to transfer it here, we want to give it a full 1/4 of an inch off the piece because we want a 1/4 of an inch from the wall. Beautiful. Nice.
All right, now you got to take a board and then do the offcut. Piece of cake. Because this door is already installed, we are going to have to cut the jamb so that we can slide our floor underneath it. We're going to just take our oscillating tool, set it on our product, and then use that as our depth setter. And then what we'll get is we'll get a jamb that is the thickness of that blade, which is super thin. See this? Now the flooring slides underneath. And because we made a mess, we're gonna grab the vacuum and suck that up real quick. Time for the third row, and this one we're gonna do a little differently. Instead of going one plank at a time, we're gonna go one whole row at a time. I'm gonna give you guys a secret. As homeowners, the margin of error is all dependent on your baseboards. I recommend in a basement, always go with a wood baseboard that is 3/4 inch thick. And here's why. We've used a floor leveler. We don't have ups and downs in our wall. And that gives us the ability to have a gap, and anything that we do is going to be guaranteed covered, never need a shoe mold, never need an additional piece of trim. And it gives you all that mercy that you need for all the little mistakes that are gonna happen along the way, okay? So we're just gonna lift this up onto that flooring. And then now we're gonna roll it in, and it's gonna need a little additional help to get that clicked. Like we talked about, right now it's installed, but it's not sitting down. What happens is we just got to give it a little bit of love here. The next 4 pieces together. So what we have going on here is a little separation anxiety here, guys. From that piece to this piece, they're tight at both ends, but the gap opens up in the middle, which means that all this hammering has moved this flooring and pushed it over a little bit. Now the only way to move it all back is just grab something to swing at here that's not going to cause any damage. So that got it, right? All right, so moment of truth, guys. We have enough flooring on this floor. It's about 3 boxes of flooring. That's about 150 pounds, all right? And Matt's gonna use another board in the groove, but so that he can get his hands on it and push. And we're gonna give this sucker a shove and push her into place. I have got a concern here. Just a little bit, go, right there. So as we can see, if you take a look down the whole row, We have more gap than we need, and the only place that makes contact is right here at this door. We got the slope right because the tile's a little bit twisted, but for whatever reason, when we scribed, we just didn't scribe enough material to be removed. We are about 3/8 of an inch, Matt, you think? Is that safe? 1/2 inch, I think, might be too much. Gotta be careful I don't take too much off here and then leave a gap here and making contact on the drywall. So we're gonna push the floor back. We're gonna take up a few pieces of the flooring, run this through a saw, get it cut back down, reinstall this all. We're gonna fix this gap. It's a perfect opportunity to do that. And then we're gonna reassemble the flooring. There are a lot of products out there that break during installation. We have the ability to take this apart and then reinstall it again. There are brands you cannot do that. One of the benefits of a WPC core is that it gives you that flexibility. So now that we've fixed our mistake, we've reinstalled all the flooring, we've got it all nice and tight and straight, which is super important. Now it's time for us to anchor this into the concrete so that it's not moving around. It's like building a foundation for a house. We're gonna take Tapcon screws, comes with the bit. It's a nice flat washer head. You wanna be able to make sure your hole is deeper than the screw. And this is the thickness of my baseboard, which means I've got lots of meat to work with here. So all I'm gonna do is drive a screw near the edge with a hammer drill function. And that's all the resistance that I need to get this done. The secret here is these screws are temporary, okay? We're gonna put in 2 screws per board. The other thing that this does is when we compress that screw, we're taking the board and we're forcing it down. So in that locking joint, we're taking it past the point of neutral, just a little compression so it can't slip out. Remember, when we lift it up, it pops out. So by having it under pressure, it guarantees that that locking joint's not gonna open while we're banging around. Now we can just build this like wildfire. Beautiful. Before we start the next row, because we are working from right to left, because it's a tongue and groove, we want to intentionally end up where we don't have one of these short side joints in the middle of the doorway, okay? Again, that would be a high probability for it to disengage. Let's say we finish with a full board. You can tell it's just up against the wall. And so somewhere between here and here, all right, we want to finish. Now, we don't want to be anywhere near this H-ing, so we want to be at least 9 inches back. We don't want to be lined up with this one. I think somewhere around here would be perfect. We're just going to dry fit and lay out the flooring going back the other direction so we know the size of the offcut that we're going to start with as we build this next row. It's a little added step, but knowing the end from the beginning is where you get success here. All right, so now we got a starting strip. Let's get this all built. And we're coming on both sides of this. 3 to the tongue. That's not quite 3. Something there. You know, one of the benefits working with this product is it's so thick that it actually has enough strength to pull things like this off. A lot of products out there are a little bit too thin to be able to manipulate like this without breaking off halfway through. Now it's time for us to do our threshold. And this is a transition from one flooring surface to the other that are roughly the same height. That's designed to just cover that gap so that they can be installed and repaired individually. And the company makes all these profiles in all the different colors. So what you want to do, take your underpad, take a sample piece of flooring, okay? And then take your transition, and that fits really nice, okay? They're about the same height, nice and stable. Of course, my carpet has got a DMX underpad as well with a dimple barrier. If I put my track on top of carpet next to that flooring and I press it all down, I get a nice transition and it's gonna be really stable and well supported. The problem is, in order to install this track properly, I have to drill through that down to the concrete. In my experience, drilling anything through a carpet, if it grabs a fiber, it'll just run and you'll have a line of carpet ripped out around that drill bit because it's rotating a few thousand rotations per second. And you'll get a run all the way across the room and your brand new carpet is instantly garbage. So we can create support for the track with cedar shims, then install our flooring, and then snap that in securely. And that is a really good assembly. So you're gonna have to sort out a couple of minor details based on the thickness of your flooring, what you're transitioning to, what kind of underlayment you're using in both situations. Now, in my situation, it's a little unique because I have a soundproof office here, and I like my door right tight to my carpet. So my transition, I'm going to install from the edge of my doorstop to the edge of the doorstop and have the door come up and make contact with it right there. Boom. So in order to do that, I first have to go with my oscillating tool and cut out my doorstop. To do that, I'm going to just take my shim to create a little space here. Nice. There, now I got a straight edge here. I want to cut my carpet to within about 1/4 inch of the interior of that line, because that is where my transition is going to finish to. And carpet underlayment. Get the DMX in. All right, now I'm going to take my cedar shims and set those up, because now that becomes the dimension of my flooring install. First thing we got to do, measure and cut the length of our board. We want to get the edge of this flooring lined up and the tongue should be overlapped. We're going to try to make this cut incredibly precise. So I want it tight to the jamb. So I'm looking at 3 inches. I'm going to say that I am more like 2 7/8. 4.5. I'm going to just take a little bit off the 4.5. That, and that get cut off. And we'll come down here and give this a try. So we're close here, but the tongue here is actually going to be in the way. Because we're locking the joint in here, and then our baseboard trim will effectively sit right on top of that. Not having that tongue engaged for that 1.5 inches is going to have 0 effect. All right, there's no consequence to this. So what we're going to do is on an angle, away from your profile, we'll just cut that out of there. Now we're in business. I'm feeling good over here. I'm just a little bit tight on this side. I'm gonna move my shims temporarily so I can get in here and lock this bad boy in. Now what I gotta do is I've got to establish where this locking joint goes, because it sits right there. And you can see there are tiny little fins. And this trim has got a hook on it that grabs those fins. So what we want to do is put this in the perfect position so that when it's snapped in, I get that coverage. If I don't pay attention to how I'm doing this and I install it wrong, it'll snap in and it'll be in front of the cut. We're going to take 2 little samples, snap them together. We're going to make a mark for where our piece is going to go, because I want to have this touching the door. So I've got to get this in the perfect location. So I've got my cut piece, and we're going to just push the shims to the flooring. Now, I'm going to just tape this in place. It's a little rudimentary, but it'll do the job. That way, if the shims are underneath moving around during my drilling session, at least the plastic stays where it's supposed to be. I'm going to use my hammer drill again. Don't forget your ear protection. Now, I want to put 1 hole for every 6 inches. So now when you walk on this, it shouldn't move even an ounce. So we're coming up to the closet underneath the stairs now. First thing I'm doing, I'm dry fitting the room. Like any door, I don't want to have a joint right on a corner. That's another bad space, okay? So I've got to make a decision here. It's kind of like the lesser of 2 evils. There. Now, how wide is that? Oof. Now that is exactly, I said it was my minimum. That is crazy. All right, so we'll get this one installed. Looking to maintain our 1/4 inch gap. Now, if we move this carefully together, nothing disengages. But if we get all sloppy, then these joints start to open up. And then we got work to do later. Now, I know some of you are just naturally curious. Like, what are you doing underneath your stairs, Jeff? And the answer is I'm going to make a closet in here. So if you wanted to see that, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. So this is interesting. While we're doing our install, we've recently had a huge rainstorm. So we have a little bit of moisture here in the floor. And I don't care. I'm not going to stop and worry about it or investigate, because this is why we use DMX. Okay, so we're getting ready to install the last boards. And I want you to focus really closely on these gaps, because some of these are nice and tight, and some of them, there's just a pencil line of opening. We're finally going to be able to use the Z-bar. I've cut myself about a 1.5 inch piece of profile. All right, nice and square. Now when you're using this, you can actually close 2 lines and up to 3, depending on the size of the product you're working with. But we're just going to watch the gap right here. And that is completely perfect. And same thing over here. Just got a bit of a gap opening up. There's just not enough room to swing with the traditional block here, so that takes care of that. Now we're ready. Matt's already ripped all these off the table saw. We're gonna show you one more trick for finishing off all these rows. Now we wanna pull it forward and then stand it up and then slide it into the groove. Now I'm gonna just use this as my compression system. So just listen to the click. There you go. There we go.
Woo!
I know. So what do you say we clean all this mess up and we'll let you have a look at the befores and afters. And if you have any basement flooring questions, jump in the comments section and I'll do my best to help you out. Cheers.